In a rundown Detroit gas station, an exhausted nursing student was about to face 3 gang members who saw her military bearing as disrespect. What started as a routine fuel stop took a shocking turn when they decided to teach her a lesson. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical college student. For 3 tours in Afghanistan, she had served as a combat medic with Army Rangers, known for saving lives under impossible conditions. When she fought back against her attackers, she had no idea this would trigger a reckoning. Her former Ranger unit's response would expose a nationwide conspiracy targeting veterans, proving that some bonds of brotherhood transcend civilian life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights inside the Corktown Express cast sickly shadows across cracked linoleum as Sarah Mitchell pushed through the glass door, the electronic chime barely audible over the distant rumble of late-night Detroit traffic. Her scrubs still carried the antiseptic smell of Detroit General's emergency ward, where she'd just finished a brutal 12-hour clinical rotation that had stretched into 16. The coffee she'd grabbed from the vending machine 3 hours ago had long since worn off, leaving her running on muscle memory and the stubborn determination that had carried her through 3 tours in Afghanistan. Her Honda Civic sat at pump 4. Its paint faded to a color that might once have been blue. Sarah had bought it cash from a departing medical student, and while it burned oil and the air conditioning only worked on Tuesdays, it got her from her cramped studio apartment to the hospital and back. Tonight's detour to this particular gas station wasn't planned. She'd passed 3 other stations on her usual route home, but they were all closed for overnight maintenance. The Corktown Express stayed open 24 hours, serving the kind of neighborhood where people worked odd shifts and needed gas at 3 in the morning. Sarah swiped her debit card at the pump, wincing slightly as she calculated how much the fill-up would cost against her remaining grocery budget. Nursing school didn't leave much time for anything beyond minimum-wage work-study positions, and her GI Bill covered tuition, but not much else. She'd gotten used to the tight margins, the careful calculations of whether she could afford both gas and lunch. It was still better than the factory work that had defined her childhood in Ohio, watching her father come home each night with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. The pump clicked to life, and Sarah leaned against her car, letting her shoulders sag for the first time in hours. Her back ached from bending over patients, and her feet throbbed in the sensible shoes that all the nurses recommended. In Afghanistan, she'd carried 60 pounds of medical gear through mountain passes without complaining. Now, 12 hours in a hospital ward left her feeling twice as old as her 28 years. A memory surfaced unbidden. "Master Sergeant," Harrison's voice cutting through the chaos of a Taliban ambush outside Kandahar. "Mitchell, we've got 2 down behind that boulder. Can you reach them?" She'd low-crawled through 50 meters of sniper fire to get to those Rangers, saved Harrison's life when an AK round had opened his femoral artery. He'd been unconscious by the time she'd gotten a tourniquet on him, but he'd lived. They'd all lived that day because Sarah had been there with her medical bag and her refusal to let good soldiers die. The gas pump's automatic shutoff brought her back to the present. Sarah replaced the nozzle and screwed on her gas cap, the familiar ritual grounding her in the here and now. She was reaching for her car door when she noticed them. 3 men emerged from the shadows near the dumpster behind the station, their movements deliberate and coordinated. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Threat assessment had become as automatic as breathing during her deployments. The leader was tall and lean, with the kind of wiry strength that came from street fighting, rather than gyms. His companions flanked him at precise intervals, one stocky and muscular, the other younger, but carrying himself with the nervous energy of someone trying to prove something. "Evening, soldier girl," the leader called out, his voice carrying. the mock politeness that Sarah recognized from a dozen hostile encounters overseas. The way he said soldier made it sound like an insult. Sarah kept her expression neutral, her hand resting on her car door handle. "Just getting gas," she replied evenly, heading home. The stocky one, Marcus, she heard the leader call him, stepped closer to her car, his eyes taking in the small military decals on her rear window. A faded 82nd Airborne patch, a combat medic cross. "Looks like we got ourselves a war hero," he said, his tone mocking. "What you think, Terrell? She looked like she belonged in this neighborhood." Terrell, the leader, smiled without warmth. "Nah, Marcus, she definitely don't belong here. This is Razor's territory, and Razor don't like uninvited guests, especially ones who think they special 'cause they played soldier." The youngest one, Deshawn, had positioned himself behind Sarah's car, cutting off her most direct escape route. Sarah noted the placement with the detached calm she'd learned in combat zones. They weren't just intimidating her. They were controlling her movement options. This wasn't random street crime. This was practiced. "I'm not looking for trouble," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. "Just let me leave, and there won't be any problems." Terrell's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Problems? Sister, you became a problem the minute you rolled into our neighborhood, acting like you own the place, walking around with that military bearing, like you better than folks who live here." He stepped closer, and Sarah caught the smell of alcohol and marijuana on his breath. "See, Razor runs this area. And when somebody disrespects his territory, disrespects his people, well, that requires a response." Sarah's hand shifted slightly on the door handle, her thumb finding the small tactical pen clipped inside her pocket. It wasn't much, but she'd learned long ago that even the smallest weapon could be decisive in the right hands. "I'm not disrespecting anyone. I just needed gas." "You disrespected us by coming here," Deshawn said from behind her car, his voice cracking slightly with adolescent bravado. "Acting all high and mighty like you ain't scared of us." The truth was, Sarah wasn't scared. Not in the way they wanted her to be. She'd faced down Taliban fighters and treated wounded soldiers under rocket fire. 3 gang members in a Detroit parking lot didn't rate the same level of fear, but she was concerned, because fear and caution were different things, and her training had taught her the difference. Marcus moved closer, his bulk casting a shadow across Sarah's face. "Maybe we need to teach you some respect. Show you how things work in the real world, not whatever fantasy you've been living in." That's when Sarah's combat instincts fully engaged. The shift was subtle but complete. Her stance widened slightly, her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, and her peripheral vision expanded to track all 3 men simultaneously. She'd made this transition hundreds of times in Afghanistan, the moment when situational awareness became combat readiness. "I'm going to get in my car now," she said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used when treating wounded soldiers, calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. "You're going to step back and let me leave." Terrell's eyes narrowed. He'd heard that tone before, recognized the shift in her posture. "Military training ain't gonna help you here, soldier girl. This ain't Afghanistan." But Sarah was already moving. When Marcus reached for her arm, her training took over. She pivoted away from his grab, the tactical pen appearing in her hand as she drove it toward the nerve cluster in his shoulder. The movement was fluid, practiced, automatic, muscle memory developed through countless hours of combatives training. Marcus screamed as the pen found its target, his arm going temporarily numb. Sarah followed through, driving her knee toward his solar plexus. But Deshawn was already moving from behind the car. She spun to face him, catching his wild swing on her forearm and driving her elbow back into his face. The satisfying crunch of his nose breaking was lost in the chaos as Terrell finally joined the fight. Sarah had been trained to fight multiple opponents, but the training scenarios had always assumed she'd have backup, or cover, or at least the element of surprise. In the bright lights of the gas station, outnumbered 3-1, with her back to her car, she was fighting at a severe disadvantage. Tyrell was smarter than his companions, waiting for her to commit to attacking Deshawn before moving in from her blind side. His first punch caught her in the ribs, and Sarah felt something. Crack! Pain flared through her torso, but she managed to grab his wrist and use his momentum to throw him past her into the side of her car. For a moment, it looked like she might actually win. Marcus was still clutching his shoulder. Deshawn was spitting, blood from his broken nose, and Tyrell was dazed from his impact with the car. Sarah had the tactical pen ready and enough space to potentially reach her driver's door. But then Marcus recovered enough to grab the tire iron he'd dropped when she'd hit him with the pen. The weapon changed everything. Sarah tried to dodge, but the confined space between the cars limited her options. The tire iron caught her across the shoulder, spinning her around and sending the tactical pen flying into the darkness. After that, it was just brutality, 3 against 1, with Sarah's training negated by the sheer violence of their retaliation. She got in a few more hits, another broken nose for Marcus, what felt like a cracked rib for Tyrell when she managed to drive her elbow into his side. But it wasn't enough. The end came when Deshawn, maddened by pain and humiliation, grabbed her from behind, while Tyrell and Marcus took turns with their fists. Sarah tried to break free, but the concussion from Tyrell's punch was already affecting her balance and coordination. The last thing she remembered was the cold concrete of the parking lot rushing up to meet her face and the distant sound of the gas station clerk screaming into a phone. The fluorescent lights above blurred into stars, then darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, Sarah's last conscious thought was a bitter irony. She'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan without serious injury, only to be beaten unconscious in a Detroit parking lot while buying gas to get home. The Corktown Express kept its lights burning bright, indifferent witness to the violence that had erupted in its shadow. By the time the first police car arrived, 7 minutes after the clerk's panicked 911 call, Sarah Mitchell lay unconscious. Beside her Honda Civic, her military training and fierce independence finally insufficient against the brutal mathematics of urban violence. The sirens faded into the distance as Sarah's Honda Civic sat abandoned under the harsh fluorescent glow, its driver's door still hanging open like a wound. Blood pooled on the cracked asphalt where she'd fallen, dark against the oil stains that marked countless other vehicles' brief stops at Pump 4. The gas station clerk, a 19-year-old community college student named Jerome, stood behind bulletproof glass, giving his statement to Officer Rodriguez with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "I don't know, man," Jerome kept repeating, his voice muffled through the speaker. "It happened so fast. 3 dudes jumped this lady. She fought back real hard, then they beat her down and ran. I called 911 soon as I saw it going bad." Officer Rodriguez scribbled notes with practiced indifference. Another random assault in Corktown, another victim who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The woman's military decals suggested she was a veteran, which was unfortunate but not uncommon. Detroit had plenty of former service members who'd come home to find that surviving Afghanistan didn't guarantee surviving the streets. 250 miles south, Master Sergeant Daniel Wolf Harrison was leading his rangers through night infiltration exercises in the Georgia pine forests surrounding Fort Benning when his encrypted phone buzzed against his chest. His vibration pattern was specific: 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Emergency contact from the Veteran Crisis Network. Wolf held up a closed fist, bringing his squad to an immediate halt. 12 rangers melted into the underbrush with practiced silence, their night vision goggles painting the world in familiar green hues. In Afghanistan, this kind of stop could mean the difference between completing a mission and walking into a Taliban ambush. Here in Georgia, it meant Wolf needed to take a call that couldn't wait. "Harrison," he answered, keeping his voice low. "Sergeant Harrison, this is Dr. Rebecca Walsh at Detroit General Hospital. I'm calling about Sarah Mitchell. She was admitted tonight after an assault, and your number was listed as an emergency contact." The words hit Wolf like incoming artillery. Sarah Mitchell. The medic who'd crawled through 50 meters of sniper fire to save his life outside Kandahar. The woman who'd stayed calm under pressure, while blood pumped from his severed artery, talking him through the pain with that steady Ohio accent, while rockets exploded around their position. "How bad?" Wolf's voice carried the clipped precision of a soldier receiving casualty reports. "Severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding. She's stable now, but—" Dr. Walsh paused, choosing her words carefully. "The injuries suggest this wasn't a robbery. This was personal." Wolf closed his eyes, his free hand clenching into a fist. Sarah had saved his life, and he'd carried that debt for 3 years. More than debt, she was family in the way that only combat veterans understood. "You didn't abandon family." "I'll be there," he said simply. "Sergeant, visiting hours don't start until—" "I'll be there," Wolf repeated, ending the call. The Rangers emerged from concealment at his signal, reading the tension in their leader's posture. Specialist Ryan "Hawk" Anderson, barely 22, and still eager to prove himself worthy of the tab on his shoulder, was the first to speak. "What's the situation, Sergeant?" Wolf looked at his squad. 8 Rangers who'd followed him through 2 deployments, who trusted his judgment with their lives. "Personal emergency. Exercise is terminated. Return to base." As his men filed past, Wolf was already accessing his contacts through the encrypted military network. Staff Sergeant Elena Shadow Martinez was currently assigned to intelligence duties at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. Sergeant First Class Michael Shepard Brooks was on leave in North Carolina, probably reading philosophy books to his kids before bed. All of them owed their lives to Sarah Mitchell in one way or another. The first call went to Elena. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "Wolf, what's wrong?" "Sarah's been attacked. Detroit. I need you mobile." Elena's silence lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to process the information and begin planning. "How long do I have?" "How long do you need?" 4 hours to clear my schedule and get on the road. I'll call it family emergency." "It is family emergency." The second call reached Michael at his home in Charlotte. Wolf could hear children's voices in the background, the domestic sounds of bedtime routines that felt foreign to a man who'd spent 20 years in barracks and forward operating bases. "Wolf, it's past midnight. This better be—" "Sarah's in the hospital. Assault. I'm putting the team together." Michael's tone shifted immediately. "How bad?" "Bad enough. You coming?" Wolf heard Michael talking quietly to someone, his wife probably, explaining why Daddy had to leave again. The conversation lasted 30 seconds, then Michael was back on the line. "I'll be on the road in an hour. Send me the details." The third call was the most complicated. Specialist Anderson was currently on duty, and technically Wolf had no authority to authorize his leave. But Ryan had been with them in Helmand Province, when Sarah had kept him from bleeding out after an IED blast, talking the terrified kid through his first real taste of combat while she worked to save his leg. "Sergeant Harrison?" Ryan's voice carried the crisp formality of a soldier answering his superior at 300 hours. "Personal question, Anderson. You still owe Sarah Mitchell your life?" "Every day, Sergeant." "Then find a way to get to Detroit. Family emergency." "Copy that. I'll figure it out." The fourth call was the one Wolf dreaded most. Captain Jennifer Steele Patterson commanded their company and had earned her position through competence, political savvy, and an iron will. that had broken more than one cocky ranger who thought a woman couldn't lead them. She answered on the first ring, fully alert. "Harrison, this better be good." "Ma'am, requesting emergency leave. Family situation." "Denied. You're scheduled to run exercises for the next 72 hours. Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone used to making decisions that affected lives. What's the real story? Wolf made a calculated risk. Patterson had served in Iraq, understood the bonds forged in combat. Sarah Mitchell was assaulted in Detroit, my medic from Afghanistan. She's in critical condition. The silence stretched. For 10 seconds. When Patterson spoke again, her tone had shifted subtly. "The medic who saved your life at Kandahar?" "Yes, ma'am." "You have 48 hours personal leave, unofficial. If anyone asks, you're dealing with a family crisis in Montana." Another pause. "Harrison?" "Yes, ma'am." "Bring her home safe." By 0400 hours, Wolf was driving north on I-75 in his personal vehicle, a beat-up Ford truck that had seen better decades. His gear bag contained civilian clothes, encrypted communications equipment, and enough personal items to suggest he was visiting family in case anyone asked questions. The highway stretched ahead in the pre-dawn darkness, empty except for long-haul truckers and other travelers with urgent business. Wolf's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was churning through possibilities. Sarah didn't have enemies. She was the kind of person who brought injured birds to veterinarians and volunteered at homeless shelters. Random street crime was possible, but Wolf's instincts, honed by years of combat, suggested otherwise. His phone buzzed with incoming messages. Elena reporting she'd cleared her schedule and was en route. Michael confirming he was on the road. Ryan updating that he'd managed to get compassionate leave approved. The network was activating, converging on Detroit with the precision of a military operation. Wolf thought about Sarah as he drove through the darkness. How she'd stayed calm under fire, how she'd never lost a patient she could save, how she'd planned to become a trauma nurse after the army. She'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, saved dozens of lives, earned the respect of every ranger she'd served with. Now she was lying unconscious in a Detroit hospital, and Wolf was driving through the night to honor a debt that went deeper than military obligation. In Afghanistan, they'd lived by a simple code. You never left anyone behind. That code didn't end when you took off the uniform. The highway signs counting down miles to Detroit passed in steady succession, each one bringing Wolf closer to a reckoning that would test everything he'd learned about loyalty, justice, and the true meaning of brotherhood. Behind him, 3 other vehicles were converging on the same destination, carrying rangers who understood that some debts could only be paid in full. The Motor City Motel sat like a forgotten relic on Detroit's 8-mile road, its neon sign flickering intermittently between vacancy and darkness. Wolf had chosen it for tactical reasons: cash payment, no questions asked, and clear sight. Lines to 3 major highways. Room 127 had become an impromptu command center within 6 hours of Sarah's attack, its faded wallpaper and cigarette-burned carpet witnessing the transformation of 4 civilians into a functioning intelligence. Unit Elena Shadow Martinez arrived first, her rental car pulling into the lot at 800 hours with the precision of a scheduled operation. She'd made the drive from Virginia in record time, stopping only for gas and to change from her dress blues into civilian clothes that would let her blend into Detroit's urban landscape. Her intelligence training had taught her that information was the most powerful weapon, and she'd spent the drive gathering everything she could about the Corktown neighborhood where Sarah had been attacked. Michael Shepard Brooks reached the motel 20 minutes later, his personal vehicle loaded with medical supplies that might prove useful. His gentle demeanor masked a sharp, tactical mind, and he'd already begun planning how to coordinate with the hospital staff treating Sarah, Ryan "Hawk" Anderson was the last to arrive, his youthful face showing the strain of driving through the night after convincing his commanding officer that his grandmother was dying in Michigan. Wolf had used the early morning hours to establish contact with local veteran organizations, tapping into the informal network that connected former service members across the country. What he'd learned wasn't encouraging. Detroit's veteran community was under siege, facing everything from predatory lending to employment discrimination. But it was Detective Tony Romano who provided the most disturbing intelligence. Romano had been working Sarah's case since dawn, and the initial police report told a story that didn't match the evidence. 3 attackers, described by the gas station clerk as gang members, had specifically targeted a woman pumping gas, but Sarah's injuries suggested someone with training. The broken ribs were precise, calculated to cause maximum pain without immediate life-threatening damage. This wasn't random street crime. 3 similar attacks in the past year, Romano explained during his lunch break, meeting Wolf at a diner 6 blocks from the motel. The detective's weathered face showed the strain of 20 years watching his city decay, while dirty cops profited from the chaos. All veterans, all in neighborhoods controlled by the same crew, all dismissed as random crimes. Wolf studied the case files Romano had quietly copied. Each attack followed the same pattern: isolated veterans, superior numbers, violence that stopped just short of murder. Who's running that crew? Darius Williams, goes by Razor, smart, connected and careful. His territory runs from Corktown down to the riverfront. Romano's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Word is, he's got protection from inside the department. How high up? Romano's silence was answer enough. Wolf understood. Corruption that protected gang operations usually reached the upper levels of command. It explained why 3 previous attacks had been buried in paperwork and forgotten. Back at the motel, Elena was conducting her own investigation using skills learned in Army intelligence. Her laptop displayed a complex web of social media profiles, property records, and financial transactions. Growing up in East LA had given her intimate knowledge of gang culture, and she'd identified at least 6 members of Razor's crew through their online presence. These aren't street kids, she reported as the team gathered around her laptop. Military-age males, several with criminal records, but they're organized. Look at this. The screen showed surveillance photos taken from social media posts. Gang members posing with weapons, but the weapons were clean, well-maintained, and several appeared to be military surplus. More concerning were the tactical, vests and communication equipment visible in some photos. They're equipped like a paramilitary unit, Michael observed, his medical training allowing him to identify some of the gear. This isn't just local muscle. Ryan, meanwhile, had put his technical skills to work tracking financial connections. What he'd found suggested a sophisticated money laundering operation that extended far beyond simple drug sales. Check this out, he said, pointing to a series of transactions on his screen. Money flows from street operations into legitimate businesses, then gets filtered through city contracts. Wolf absorbed the information with the methodical precision of a mission briefing. The enemy wasn't just a gang, it was a network that included corrupt officials, dirty cops, and possibly military surplus dealers. Sarah's attack hadn't been random. It had been a message, a demonstration of power in territory that Razor considered his own. We need someone inside the system, Wolf concluded. Romano's giving us what he can, but he's limited by his own department. That's when Elena mentioned the conversation she'd overheard at a coffee shop near the hospital. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the trauma surgeon treating Sarah, had been arguing with someone on her phone about another veteran, another cover-up. Elena had followed her to the parking garage and carefully approached with a story about being Sarah's sister. She knows something, Elena reported, the way she talked about Sarah's injuries, like she'd seen this pattern before, and she's angry about it. Wolf made the decision to approach Dr. Walsh directly. The hospital's ICU was heavily secured, but visiting hours would give them legitimate access. More importantly, medical professionals were often the first to notice patterns that law enforcement missed or ignored. At Detroit General Hospital, Dr. Walsh was completing her afternoon rounds when Wolf appeared at the nurses' station. His bearing immediately identified him as military, and when he asked about Sarah Mitchell, the doctor's expression shifted from professional courtesy to sharp attention. "You're one of her unit," she said. Not a question. "Master Sergeant Harrison, Sarah saved my life in Afghanistan." Dr. Walsh studied his face for several seconds, then made a decision that would alter the course of the investigation. "There's something you need to see." In her office, away from surveillance cameras and curious ears, Dr. Walsh revealed the documentation she'd been keeping. 3 veterans in the past year, all with similar injury patterns, all attacks dismissed by police as random crimes. Sarah's case was the 4th, and the most severe. "Internal bleeding consistent with precise kidney strikes," she explained, showing Wolf the medical files. "Broken ribs that suggest someone who knew exactly where to hit for maximum pain. They weren't random beatings. They were professional interrogations that went too far. Interrogations about what? I don't know. But I've seen enough battlefield injuries to recognize the difference between random violence and tactical brutality." Dr. Walsh's voice carried the weight of someone who'd treated too many casualties. "Your friend fought back harder than the others. That's probably why they escalated." Wolf absorbed this information while calculating the implications. If Sarah's attack was part of a larger pattern targeting veterans, then the Rangers weren't just dealing with gang violence. They were facing a systematic campaign against people who'd served their country. As evening approached, the team regrouped at the motel to share intelligence. Romano had confirmed that Commissioner Sullivan was blocking any serious investigation into veteran attacks. Elena had identified 3 safe houses used by Razor's crew. Michael had established contact with Dr. Walsh and gained access to Sarah's medical records. Ryan had traced financial connections that suggested city officials were profiting from gang protection rackets. The picture emerging was one of institutional corruption that went far beyond street crime. Sarah's attack had been a message, but it had also been a mistake. Targeting a combat medic who'd served with Army Rangers was about to bring consequences that Razor and his protectors hadn't anticipated. Wolf stood at the motel room window, looking out at the Detroit skyline, where lights were beginning to flicker on against the gathering darkness. Somewhere in that urban maze, the people responsible for Sarah's attack thought they were safe behind walls of corruption and official protection. They were about to learn that Rangers didn't abandon their own, and that some debts could only be paid in full. The knock on room 127's door came at exactly 600 hours. 3 sharp raps followed by 2, then 1, a pattern Wolf recognized from their Afghanistan operations. He opened the door to find Captain Jennifer Steele Patterson standing in the morning shadows, dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying herself with the unmistakable bearing of a field commander conducting an inspection. "Ma'am," Wolf said, stepping aside to let her enter. The room fell silent as Elena, Michael, and Ryan snapped to attention, despite wearing jeans and t-shirts instead of uniforms. Patterson surveyed the makeshift command center with professional interest. Elena's laptop displayed gang surveillance. Photos, Michael's medical supplies were organized with military precision, and Ryan's technical equipment hummed quietly in the corner. Maps of Detroit covered one wall, marked with red pins indicating gang territory and blue pins showing police stations. "At ease," Patterson said finally. "Officially, I'm here to conduct a wellness check on my soldiers who are dealing with a family emergency." Her tone shifted slightly. Unofficially, I'm here because Sarah Mitchell saved half my company during the Helmand offensive, and institutional loyalty only goes so far. Wolf understood the subtext. Patterson was walking a tightrope between military regulations and personal obligation, offering support while maintaining plausible deniability. Her presence meant access to intelligence resources that could transform their amateur investigation into something approaching professional capability. "What's the tactical situation?" Patterson asked, settling into the room's single chair. "With the economy of movement that marked career officers, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Elena briefed her on Razor's GRU structure, while Ryan displayed financial connections on his laptop screen. Michael provided medical analysis of the attack patterns, and Wolf summarized Detective Romano's intelligence about police corruption. Patterson absorbed the information without comment, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her own strategic thinking. "You're dealing with a protection racket that extends into city government," she concluded. "Razor's crew provides muscle, corrupt cops provide cover, and city officials provide legitimacy through contracts and zoning decisions. Sarah's attack wasn't random, it was territorial enforcement." The briefing was interrupted by Wolf's encrypted phone buzzing with a text from Romano. "Hospital now. Sarah awake." Detroit General's ICU buzzed with controlled chaos as the Rangers arrived to find Dr. Walsh emerging from Sarah's room. Her expression mixed relief with concern as she approached the group. "She's conscious and coherent, but still in considerable pain," Dr. Walsh reported. "I've limited visitors to family only, which means you have maybe 10 minutes before hospital security starts asking questions." Sarah looked smaller against the hospital bed's white sheets, her face bearing purple. Bruises that made Wolf's jaw clench involuntarily, but her eyes were alert, tracking the Rangers' entry with the situational awareness that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. "Wolf," she said, her voice rough but steady, "should have known you'd show up." "How you feeling, Doc?" Wolf asked, using the nickname they'd given her in Afghanistan. "Like I got run over by a Humvee, but I'll heal." Sarah's gaze swept over Elena, Michael, and Ryan. "You didn't all need to come here." "Yeah, we did," Michael said simply, his gentle voice carrying absolute conviction. Sarah tried to sit up straighter, wincing as her broken ribs protested. "They knew things," she said suddenly. "The ones who attacked me. They knew I was a medic, knew I'd served with Rangers. This wasn't random." Eleanor leaned forward. "What exactly did they say?" "The leader called me soldier girl before I even got out of my car. Said I was disrespecting their territory by acting like I was better than people who lived there." Sarah's eyes hardened. "But it was more than that. He said Razor runs the area, and when somebody disrespects his territory, it requires a response." Wolf exchanged glances with Patterson. Razor's crew had targeted Sarah specifically because of her military bearing, her refusal to show the fear they expected from their victims. It confirmed their assessment that this was about territorial control and intimidation. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "When I fought back, when I broke that kid's nose, the leader said something about military training not helping me here, like he'd dealt with veterans before." Dr. Walsh had been listening from the doorway, and now she spoke up. "The other 3 attacks I documented, all the victims had military backgrounds. All were targeted in neighborhoods controlled by the same crew." Patterson's expression remained neutral, but Wolf caught the slight tightening around her eyes. That indicated tactical calculations. "Sarah, did they say anything about why veterans were being targeted?" "Not directly, but the way they talked. It was like they were sending a message, like they wanted other veterans to know that military service didn't make you special in their territory." The conversation was interrupted by Elena's phone, buzzing with an urgent message. She stepped away to check it, then returned with an expression of barely contained anger. "Gas station security footage," she announced. "Romano just confirmed it disappeared within 4 hours of the attack. But get this, the cameras were working fine, and the digital storage system shows the files were manually deleted from an admin account." "Inside job," Ryan said immediately. "Someone with system access removed the evidence." Patterson stood, her decision made. "We need to accelerate the timeline. If they're actively covering up evidence, it means they know we're investigating." As if summoned by her words, Romano appeared in the doorway looking haggard. "We've got problems," he announced without preamble. "Commissioner Sullivan just assigned Detective Ray Kowalski as lead investigator on Sarah's case. Kowalski's dirty as they come. He'll make sure this gets buried like the others." Wolf felt the familiar shift that occurred when a reconnaissance mission became a combat operation. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 24 hours before Kowalski files a report calling it a robbery gone wrong. After that, the case gets officially closed and any evidence disappears into the system." Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "There's something else you should know. I've been documenting suspicious injuries and deaths that were dismissed by police. Veterans, homeless people, anyone the system considers disposable. The pattern goes back 2 years. She handed Patterson a manila folder thick with medical records. 37 cases where the official cause of death or injury doesn't match the evidence. All in neighborhoods controlled by gangs with police protection." Patterson flipped through the files, her expression growing darker with each page. "This isn't just gang violence. This is systematic elimination of people who might resist or expose the corruption." Sarah struggled to sit up further despite her injuries. "Then we stop them. Military or civilian, Rangers don't abandon the mission." "Sarah, you're in no condition to—" Michael began. "I'm in perfect condition to be bait," Sarah interrupted. "They came after me once. They'll come again, especially if they think I might identify them." Wolf was already shaking his head. "Absolutely not. We don't use wounded soldiers as bait." "I'm not a soldier anymore, Wolf. I'm a nursing student who got beaten up in a parking lot, but I'm also the only one who can identify the attackers." Sarah's voice carried the determination that had made her legendary among the Rangers. "You want to stop this. You're going to need evidence. Real evidence, not just financial records and medical files." Patterson studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then made the kind of command decision that had earned her captain's bars. "Dr. Walsh, how long before she can be moved to a secure location?" "With proper medical support, 48 hours. Then we have 48 hours to prepare a reception for anyone who wants to finish what they started." Patterson's smile was cold and professional. Rangers adapt, improvise and overcome. Time to remind some people why that's not just a motto. As the group filed out of Sarah's room, Wolf noticed Elena checking her phone again. Her expression had shifted from anger to something approaching predatory satisfaction. "What is it?" he asked. "Razor just posted on social media," Elena replied, showing him the screen. "Picture of him and his crew at some nightclub bragging about teaching respect to people who don't belong in their neighborhood." Wolf studied the image. 5 men celebrating what they clearly considered a victory. In the background, barely visible, was a police badge hanging from one man's belt. "Looks like we found our inside man," Wolf said grimly. The lines had been drawn. Razor's crew thought they'd sent a message by attacking Sarah. What they'd actually done was declare war on the wrong group of veterans. The Rangers were about to demonstrate the difference between intimidating civilians and confronting soldiers who'd survived the worst that Afghanistan could offer. The only question now was whether Detroit's corrupt system could survive the lesson they were about to receive. Ryan "Hawk" Anderson crouched behind a rusted dumpster 3 blocks from Razor's suspected safe house, his breath forming small clouds. In the pre-dawn Detroit air, at 22, he was the youngest member of Wolf's team, and this solo reconnaissance mission felt like his chance to prove he belonged with veterans who'd seen real combat before he'd even finished basic training. The warehouse district stretched around him in geometric shadows, abandoned buildings and empty lots creating perfect concealment for surveillance operations. Ryan had positioned himself with clear sight lines to the target building while maintaining multiple escape routes, textbook fieldcraft that should have kept him safe. What he couldn't see was the trap closing around him. Razor had spent the previous evening planning his response to the military problem that Commissioner Sullivan had warned him about. 4 soldiers asking questions about Sarah Mitchell's attack represented more than curiosity. They represented a threat to the carefully constructed system that protected his operations. "These ain't regular civilians," Razor had explained to his lieutenant Marcus, while reviewing social media intelligence gathered by contacts in City Hall. "Military bearing, coordinated movement, professional surveillance techniques. They're running an operation." Marcus, his shoulder still aching, from Sarah's tactical pen, wanted immediate retaliation. "So we hit them like we hit the medic. Send a message they can't ignore." "Nah," Razor had replied, his strategic mind working through possibilities. "We take one alive, find out what they know, who sent them, what kind of official backing they got. Then we decide how hard to push back." The ambush had been set with military precision, using gang members who'd learned urban warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan before civilian life had driven them to crime. They'd identified Ryan as the most isolated target, tracked his movements through the warehouse district, and positioned themselves to cut off his escape routes. Ryan first sensed danger when his peripheral vision caught movement that didn't match the urban environment. A shadow that shifted when no wind was blowing, footsteps that echoed slightly off rhythm with the distant traffic sounds. His combat training kicked in immediately. Assess, evade, communicate. He keyed his radio with a pre-arranged signal, 2 clicks that would alert Wolf to potential contact. But before he could move to his primary escape route, 3 men emerged, from concealment with the coordinated timing of a practice military unit. "Easy there, Ranger boy," called the leader, a scarred man in his 30s, who moved with the fluid confidence of someone comfortable with violence. "Nobody needs to get hurt if you just come along quiet." Ryan's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed pistol he carried, but stopped when he spotted the 4th man positioned behind him with what looked like military-grade night vision equipment. The setup was too professional, too coordinated for street criminals. "Who's asking?" Ryan replied, buying time while calculating distances and angles. "People who know you've been asking questions about things that ain't your business." The leader stepped closer, and Ryan caught sight of tactical gear under his civilian jacket. "See, when soldiers start poking around our neighborhood, it makes folks nervous. Nervous folks make bad decisions." Ryan's training had covered capture scenarios, but always in the context of foreign enemies in hostile territory. Facing former American military personnel in an American city created moral complexities that 18 months of Ranger training hadn't fully addressed. The decision was made for him when the 4th man moved to flank his position. Ryan rolled left, drawing his weapon as he came up behind a concrete barrier. The movement was fluid, practiced, automatic, muscle memory developed through countless hours of close-quarters combat training. But these weren't insurgents in Afghanistan. They knew his tactics because they'd learned the same ones. The firefight lasted 30 seconds and covered 3 city blocks. Ryan managed to wound 1 attacker and break contact from the initial ambush site. But the pursuit that followed demonstrated just how thoroughly Razor's crew had prepared for this encounter. They herded him through the warehouse district like wolves driving prey, using superior numbers and local knowledge to limit his options. Ryan's youth and fitness kept him ahead of his pursuers, but barely. By the time he reached the abandoned auto plant that marked the edge of the district, he was running on adrenaline and desperation. The factory's interior was a maze of rusted machinery and collapsed roof sections that provided both concealment and obstacles. Ryan used the terrain to his advantage, moving through the shadows while his pursuers spread out to search for him. He almost made it. The exit was 50 meters away when Marcus appeared from behind an overturned assembly line, his own weapon trained on Ryan's center mass. End of the line, soldier boy. Ryan's military training took over completely. He dove behind a concrete pillar as Marcus fired, the bullet sparking off metal where Ryan's head had been a moment before. The return fire was immediate and accurate. Ryan had qualified expert marksman every year since joining the Rangers. Marcus screamed as the 9mm round shattered his kneecap, dropping him to the factory floor. But his cry brought the other searchers running, and Ryan found himself surrounded in the abandoned building with limited ammunition and no backup. That's when his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Wolf. Hawk, report. Contact 4. Hostiles, military training. I'm pinned down in the old Ford plant on Corktown. One enemy wounded, but they've got me surrounded. Wolf's voice carried the calm authority of a leader who'd managed similar situations in Afghanistan. Extract route? Negative. They're herding me, not hunting me. This feels like a capture operation. The significance wasn't lost on either of them. Razor's crew wanted Ryan alive, which meant interrogation and intelligence gathering. It also meant they had resources and backing that went beyond street-level gang operations. Hold position. Cavalry's coming. Ryan smiled grimly as he checked his remaining ammunition. 6 rounds left, and at least 3 hostiles still mobile. Not great odds, but he'd faced worse during training exercises. What concerned him more was the tactical radio chatter he could hear echoing through the factory. His pursuers were coordinating with outside elements, reporting their position and requesting backup. This wasn't just gang violence, it was a military-style operation with communications equipment and external support. The hunter had indeed become the hunted, but the real question was, who was backing Razor's crew with military-grade resources and tactical intelligence? Ryan's ambush had revealed capabilities that suggested connections far beyond Detroit's corrupt police department. As sirens began wailing in the distance, whether police or ambulance, friend or foe, Ryan couldn't tell, he prepared for what might be his final stand in an abandoned auto plant. But he'd already accomplished something important. He'd proven that Razor's operation had resources and backing that transformed this from a local corruption case into something much larger and more dangerous. Wolf and the team were about to learn that they weren't just fighting a gang protected by dirty cops. They were facing an enemy with military training, professional equipment, and institutional support that reached levels they hadn't yet imagined. The sirens Ryan had heard belonged to FBI agent Sarah Chen, who arrived at the abandoned Ford plant with a tactical team and federal warrants that cut through Detroit's jurisdictional confusion like a knife through silk. Her timing wasn't coincidental. Wolf's encrypted call to federal contacts had triggered an investigation that had been building momentum for months. Agent Chen was a 15-year veteran of the Bureau's Organized Crime Division, specializing in cases where gang violence intersected with official corruption. The intelligence Wolf's team had gathered in 72 hours matched patterns she'd been tracking across multiple cities, suggesting a network that extended far beyond Detroit's city limits. "Specialist Anderson," she called out as her tactical team secured the factory perimeter. "Federal agents, you're safe to come out." Ryan emerged from behind the concrete pillar with his weapon lowered but ready, his young face showing the strain of his first real firefight on American soil. The wounded gang member, Marcus, was already in federal custody, his shattered kneecap receiving medical attention while FBI agents read him his rights. "How did you know where to find me?" Ryan asked as Agent Chen approached. "We've been monitoring communications in this area for 3 months, she replied, her tone carrying the professional courtesy of someone used to dealing with military personnel. When gunfire erupted in an abandoned building, we responded. Your sergeant's federal contacts helped expedite our arrival. Wolf reached the scene 20 minutes later, driving through police cordons with credentials that Agent Chen had arranged. His expression mixed relief at finding Ryan alive with anger at the escalation that had nearly cost him one of his rangers. "Situation report," Wolf demanded as he examined Ryan for injuries. 4 hostiles with military training and professional equipment, Ryan replied, falling automatically into the crisp delivery style used for after-action reports. They knew my movement patterns, anticipated my escape routes, and coordinated like a trained unit. This wasn't street crime, Sergeant. This was a military operation. Agent Chen had been listening, and now she stepped forward with information that would reshape their understanding of the threat they faced. Your assessment is correct, Specialist. The men who ambushed you are part of a network we've been investigating. Former military personnel recruited by organized crime groups to provide security and tactical expertise. She led them to a mobile command unit parked outside the factory, its interior lined with surveillance equipment and case files that painted a disturbing picture. Maps covered one wall, showing connections between gang territories in Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. Red pins marked locations where veterans had been attacked, while blue pins indicated corrupt officials who'd buried the investigations. It's called the Iron Circle, Agent Chen explained, pointing to an organizational chart that showed financial connections between criminal enterprises and legitimate businesses. Former service members who couldn't adapt to civilian life recruited by criminal organizations that needed their tactical skills. They provide muscle, training, and operational security in exchange for steady pay and a sense of purpose. Wolf studied the intelligence with growing comprehension. Military contractors for the criminal underworld. Exactly. And Sarah Mitchell's attack fits the pattern perfectly. The Iron Circle targets veterans who might resist their territorial expansion or expose their operations. It's systematic intimidation designed to neutralize potential threats. The briefing was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rebecca Walsh, who'd left the hospital after receiving an urgent message about Ryan's situation. Her presence in the Federal Command Unit surprised Wolf until she explained her connection to the case. "I've been documenting suspicious veteran deaths and injuries for 2 years," Dr. Walsh said, handing Agent Chen a thick folder of medical records. 37 cases where the official cause doesn't match the evidence, all in neighborhoods where the Iron Circle operates. Agent Chen flipped through the files with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too many cover-ups. This is exactly what we needed. Medical evidence that shows a pattern of systematic targeting. "There's more," Dr. Walsh continued. "I've been in contact with emergency room doctors in other cities. Chicago has 14 similar cases, Cleveland has 9, Pittsburgh has 12. We've been sharing information through medical conferences, building a database that law enforcement has ignored." The revelation transformed their understanding of the scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just Detroit corruption. It was a multi-state operation with resources and connections that reached federal levels. Elena arrived at the command unit as Agent Chen was briefing Wolf on the legal framework for their investigation. Her infiltration of gang social media had revealed new intelligence about the Iron Circle's recruitment methods and operational structure. "They're advertising on veteran job forums," Elena reported, showing Agent Chen screenshots from her laptop. "Security positions, competitive pay, brothers-in-arms culture. They're specifically targeting veterans with financial problems or adjustment difficulties." Michael joined them minutes later, having driven from the hospital where he'd been coordinating Sarah's transfer to a secure federal facility. His gentle demeanor masked a sharp, tactical mind that immediately grasped the implications of what they'd discovered. Sarah's attack wasn't random, and it wasn't just territorial enforcement, he concluded after reviewing the intelligence. They were testing her response, seeing if she had the kind of training and connections that would make her useful for recruitment. Agent Chen nodded grimly. When she fought back and injured her attackers, she proved she had the skills they wanted, but she also demonstrated that she wouldn't be intimidated into cooperation. So, they escalated to eliminate her as a threat, Wolf finished. The federal investigation provided legal framework for actions that had been operating in jurisdictional gray areas. Agent Chen established the Rangers as official consultants, giving them access to federal resources while providing legal cover for their activities. But the most unexpected alliance came from Detective Romano, who arrived at the command unit with evidence that would crack the case wide open. His partner, Detective Ray Kowalski, had been feeding information to Commissioner Sullivan about the investigation, but Romano had been conducting his own surveillance, documenting the connections between police corruption and Iron Circle operations. Sullivan's been taking payments through a consulting contract with a security firm, Romano explained, showing financial records he'd obtained through careful police work. The same firm that's been recruiting veterans for the Iron Circle. Agent Chen studied the documents with growing excitement. This gives us RICO predicate offenses. We can roll up the entire network. As the alliance between federal agents, military personnel, and honest cops solidified, Sarah was being transferred from Detroit General to a secure federal medical facility. Her role had evolved from victim to key witness, but she'd also become the symbol around which their unlikely coalition had formed. The Iron Circle had made a critical error by targeting a veteran who'd served with Army Rangers. Their systematic campaign of intimidation had provoked a response that would expose their entire operation and the corrupt systems that protected them. Justice was about to be served, but the cost would be measured in more than arrests and convictions. The battle for Detroit's soul was just beginning. Commissioner Robert Bob Sullivan stared at the federal surveillance photos spread across his mahogany desk, each image a nail in the coffin of the carefully constructed empire he'd spent 15 years building. Agent Chen's investigation had moved with devastating efficiency, turning financial records and witness testimony into a federal RICO case that threatened to topple half of Detroit's power structure. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message. From Razor, hospital, tonight. Clean slate. Sullivan understood the implications immediately. With federal heat intensifying and his police protection crumbling, Razor had decided to eliminate the source of their problems. Sarah Mitchell had become more than a witness. She'd become the symbol around which their enemies had rallied. Her death would send a message about the cost of challenging the Iron Circle while removing the evidence that could destroy them all. The commissioner's fingers trembled slightly as he began deleting files from his computer. Bank records, communication, logs, personnel assignments, 15 years of corruption reduced to digital ash as his carefully maintained empire began its final collapse. At the secure federal medical facility, Sarah was completing her physical therapy session when Dr. Walsh received an urgent call from Agent Chen. The facility's security protocols were impressive. Bulletproof glass, armed federal marshals, electronic surveillance that monitored every corridor. But Chen's intelligence suggested that Razor's crew had resources that could overcome conventional security measures. "We're moving you tonight," Dr. Walsh explained to Sarah as federal agents began implementing emergency relocation procedures. "The threat assessment has escalated." Sarah struggled to sit up straighter despite her healing ribs. "I'm not running from these people. If they want to finish what they started, let them come." "Sarah, you're in no condition to—" Dr. Walsh began. "I'm in perfect condition to be exactly where I need to be," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the determined edge that had made her legendary among the Rangers. "You want to catch them?" Then you need them to make their move. Wolf arrived at the facility as the sun was setting, his tactical assessment confirming what Agent Chen's intelligence had suggested. The building's security was designed to keep out conventional threats, but Razor's crew had military training and insider knowledge of federal procedures. "They'll come through the parking garage," Wolf concluded after studying the facility's blueprints. Three-man entry team, one driver, probable police backup if Sullivan's still providing cover. Agent Chen had positioned her tactical team throughout the building, but she understood the limitations of defensive operations. "We're essentially waiting for them to choose the time and method of attack." "No," Wolf replied, his strategic mind shifting into combat mode. "We're choosing the battlefield and controlling their options." Elena had spent the afternoon conducting surveillance of Razor's known associates, tracking their movements through Detroit's criminal underground. Her intelligence training had identified patterns in their communications that suggested the timeline for their hospital assault. "They're moving tonight," she reported to the assembled team. "Social media chatter, vehicle movements, weapons purchases, everything points to immediate action." Michael examined the hospital's medical equipment with the eye of someone who understood how healing environments could be transformed into combat zones. "If they breach the building, we'll have civilian staff and other patients in the crossfire." "Not if we funnel them where we want them," Wolf replied. "Sarah's room becomes the killing field. We control access, limit their movement options, and force them to come to us on our terms." Ryan, still processing his near capture at the auto plant, volunteered for the most dangerous assignment. "I'll position myself in the parking garage. Early warning and harassment of their approach." Agent Chen coordinated with hospital security to evacuate non-essential personnel while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Federal marshals took positions throughout the building, their radio communications coordinated with Wolf's team to ensure no friendly fire incidents. As darkness fell over Detroit, Commissioner Sullivan made his final preparations for what he hoped would be the end of his federal troubles. The elimination of Sarah Mitchell would remove the key witness whose testimony could destroy the Iron Circle's operations. More importantly, it would demonstrate that federal protection meant nothing when local corruption ran deep enough. He activated his emergency communication protocol, sending coded messages to select police units that would ensure any federal response to the hospital assault would be delayed or misdirected. The same corrupt system that had protected gang operations for years would provide cover for this final operation. Razor assembled his assault team in an abandoned warehouse 6 miles from the hospital. 4 Iron Circle veterans, all with combat experience, all carrying military-grade weapons obtained through Sullivan's contacts in police evidence storage. Their plan was surgical: breach the facility's security, eliminate Sarah Mitchell, and extract before federal reinforcements could respond. "This ain't Afghanistan," Razor reminded his team as they conducted final weapons checks. "Clean, professional, and fast. We're sending a message about what happens when people interfere with our operations." Marcus, still recovering from Ryan's bullet wound to his kneecap, served as the operations communications coordinator. His role kept him away from direct combat while allowing him to coordinate with Sullivan's police units and monitor federal radio traffic. At 2147 hours, Ryan's voice crackled through the tactical communication network. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. 4 subjects, military bearing, weapons visible. Wolf's response was immediate and professional. "All stations prepare for contact. Rules of engagement, positive identification required, civilian safety paramount." The assault began exactly as Wolf had predicted. Razor's team breached the parking garage's security with professional efficiency, using shaped charges to disable electronic locks and night vision equipment to navigate the darkened corridors. But they were walking into a carefully constructed trap. Agent Chen's tactical team had positioned themselves to channel the attackers towards Sarah's room, while Ryan provided harassment fire from concealed positions in the garage. Each step brought Razor's crew deeper into a killing field, designed by veterans who understood urban warfare better than their opponents realized. The first exchange of gunfire echoed through the hospital's corridors at 21:54 hours, marking the beginning of a battle that would determine whether justice or corruption would control Detroit's future. Sarah lay in her hospital bed, listening to the distant sounds of combat and knowing that her ordeal had become the focal point for a larger war between those who served their country and those who betrayed it. The walls were indeed closing in, but the question remained whether they would trap the hunters or the hunted. The gunfire that had echoed through Detroit General's corridors fell silent at 23:47 hours, leaving behind the acrid smell of cordite and the distant wail of sirens that were finally responding to the crisis. Razor lay unconscious in the hospital's main corridor, zip-tied and bleeding from a grazing wound to his shoulder, while two of his Iron Circle operatives were being treated for injuries that would keep them in federal custody for a very long time. The third operative hadn't survived Wolf's precise application of close-quarters combat techniques learned in Afghanistan's deadliest valleys. Agent Chen surveyed the aftermath with professional satisfaction mixed with genuine relief. The hospital assault had provided the final evidence needed to dismantle the Iron Circle's operations, while demonstrating federal resolve to corrupt officials who'd thought themselves untouchable. Razor's talking, she reported to Wolf as federal agents processed the crime scene. RICO charges, conspiracy to commit murder, violation of federal civil rights statutes. He's looking at life without parole unless he cooperates fully. Wolf nodded, but his attention remained focused on Sarah's room, where Dr. Walsh was conducting a post-incident medical evaluation. The battle had lasted 13 minutes, but Sarah had remained calm throughout the crisis, providing tactical intelligence about corridor layouts, while federal agents and rangers engaged the Iron Circle assault team. "She's remarkable," Dr. Walsh observed as she completed her examination. Heart rate never exceeded combat normal parameters, no signs of panic or trauma response. She processed the situation like the combat veteran she is. Detective Romano arrived at the hospital as Commissioner Sullivan was being led away in federal custody. His 15-year reign of corruption finally ended by evidence that connected him directly to the Iron Circle's operations. Romano's own testimony about police department corruption had proven decisive in securing Sullivan's arrest. "It's over," Romano said simply, watching as his former boss was loaded into a federal transport vehicle. Sullivan's computer files, Razor's communications, the financial records, everything connects. The whole network is going down. But the real revelation came when Agent Chen's team processed Razor's encrypted communications during the hospital assault. The Iron Circle's operations extended far beyond Detroit, with cells in 17 cities and connections to defense contractors who'd been recruiting veterans for private security operations that skirted legal boundaries. "We're looking at a nationwide investigation," Agent Chen explained to the assembled team. "Congressional hearings, federal task forces, complete restructuring of how we monitor veteran recruitment by private military contractors." Ryan, still processing his first real firefight, found himself thrust into a spotlight he'd never sought. His tactical intelligence about Iron Circle procedures had proved crucial in planning the hospital's defense, while his courage under fire had demonstrated the quality of soldiers the Rangers produced. "You did good, kid," Wolf told him as federal agents continued processing evidence. "Real combat's different from training, but you adapted and overcame." Elena's intelligence work had provided the foundation for everything that followed. Financial connections, social media surveillance, gang hierarchy mapping that allowed federal agents to roll up the entire network. Her background in East LA had given her insights into criminal operations that traditional law enforcement had missed. 37 arrests in 6 cities, she reported, reading updates from FBI field offices across the Midwest. Bank accounts frozen, weapons seized, conspiracy charges filed against everyone from street soldiers to city councilmen. Michael's role had evolved from combat medic to psychological counselor as the team processed the emotional aftermath of their unauthorized mission. His gentle nature provided stability for Rangers who'd risked their careers to honor their debt. To Sarah Mitchell, "The hardest part's over," he said, treating minor injuries sustained during the hospital battle. "Now we find out whether the system we fought to protect will protect us." That answer came sooner than expected. Captain Patterson arrived at the hospital at 0630 hours, accompanied by Colonel James Thunder Morrison, Wolf's regimental commander, and a veteran of 3 combat deployments who understood the bonds forged between soldiers under fire. "Gentlemen," Colonel Morrison began, addressing the Rangers assembled in the hospital's conference room, "officially, you're facing courts-martial for unauthorized absence, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, and violation of numerous regulations regarding civilian law enforcement operations." Wolf felt his military career hanging in the balance, 20 years of service potentially ending in disgrace because he'd honored a debt to the medic who'd saved his life. "Unofficially," Morrison continued, his stern expression softening slightly, "your cooperation with federal authorities in exposing a nationwide conspiracy against American veterans has been noted at the highest levels of command. Your actions, while technically unauthorized, resulted in the disruption of criminal enterprises that posed a direct threat to national security." Agent Chen stepped forward with documents that would determine their futures. "The Department of Justice has requested that all military personnel involved in this investigation receive commendations rather than punishments. Your intelligence gathering and tactical expertise were instrumental in dismantling a criminal network that traditional law enforcement had failed to identify." The formal announcement came 3 hours later. Reprimands rather than court-martial proceedings, with notations in their files acknowledging exceptional service in support of federal law enforcement operations. Wolf's retirement would proceed as planned, but with full honors rather than the disgrace he'd feared. Sarah's transformation from victim to advocate began immediately. Her testimony before a closed Senate committee about veteran targeting by criminal organizations led to legislation requiring federal monitoring of private military contractor recruitment practices. "I'm not going to let what happened to me happen to other veterans," she declared during a press conference at Detroit General. "We served our country overseas. We deserve protection when we come home." Dr. Walsh established a trauma treatment program specifically designed for veterans, using her experience with Sarah's case to develop protocols that recognized the unique challenges faced by former service members adapting to civilian life. Detective Romano joined Agent Chen's federal task force, his insider knowledge of police corruption proving invaluable in cleaning up law enforcement agencies that had been compromised by criminal organizations. As dawn broke over Detroit, Sarah Mitchell stood at her hospital window, looking out at the city where she'd nearly died. The physical wounds were healing, but the psychological transformation was complete. She'd evolved from victim to survivor to advocate, her ordeal becoming the catalyst for changes that would protect countless other veterans. The Rangers had honored their code. They'd never left anyone behind. But more than that, they demonstrated that the bonds forged in combat transcended military service, creating chosen families strong enough to challenge institutional corruption and win. Justice had been served, but the real victory was measured in relationships strengthened through adversity and the knowledge that some principles were worth risking everything to defend. 6 months after the hospital confrontation, Master Sergeant Daniel Wolfe Harrison sat in a sterile conference room at Fort Benning, facing a panel of senior officers who would decide whether his military career ended in honor or disgrace. The formal inquiry into the Rangers' unauthorized Detroit mission had taken months to complete, with testimony from federal agents, congressional staffers, and veteran advocacy groups painting a complex picture of soldiers who'd violated regulations to serve a higher calling. Colonel Morrison presided over the proceedings with the gravitas of an officer who'd commanded men in combat and understood the weight of decisions made under pressure. "Sergeant Harrison, you and your team operated outside military authority for 6 days, engaged in civilian law enforcement activities without authorization, and placed federal investigations at risk through your interference." Wolfe maintained military bearing despite knowing his 20-year career hung in the balance. "Yes, sir, no excuse offered." However, Morrison continued, consulting documents that Agent Chen had submitted on the Rangers' behalf, "your actions resulted in the dismantling of a criminal conspiracy that had targeted American veterans in 17 cities. The Department of Justice has specifically requested that all personnel involved receive commendations rather than punishment." The final decision was a compromise that reflected the military's struggle to balance regulations with recognition of exceptional service. Official reprimands for violation of military protocols, balanced by commendations for cooperation with federal law enforcement. Wolfe's retirement would proceed as scheduled, but with full honors and a service record that acknowledged both his transgression and his ultimate vindication. "The Army doesn't abandon its own," Morrison concluded. "Sometimes that principle requires us to bend rules that were written for different circumstances." Sarah Mitchell had spent those same 6 months transforming her trauma into purpose, with the same determination she'd once applied to battlefield medicine. Her testimony before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee had been devastating in its clinical detail, describing not just her own attack, but the systematic targeting of veterans by criminal organizations with connections to corrupted government officials. "We trained soldiers to defend America overseas," she told the senators, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak for her fellow veterans. "When they come home, America should defend them." The fact that criminal organizations are specifically targeting former service members represents a betrayal of the most fundamental obligation between a nation and those who served it. The legislation that emerged from her testimony, the Veterans Protection and Advocacy Act, required federal monitoring of private military contractor recruitment practices and established protocols for investigating crimes against veterans that local authorities had dismissed or ignored. Sarah's public role as an advocate had cost her the anonymity she'd once valued, but it had also given her purpose beyond her personal recovery. The VA hospital, where she'd accepted a position as a trauma nurse, had become a model for veteran-centered care with protocols she'd helped develop being implemented at facilities nationwide. Elena Shadow Martinez had parlayed her intelligence work during the Detroit investigation into a coveted assignment with military intelligence specializing in domestic security threats. Her new role involved monitoring criminal infiltration of veteran communities and coordinating with federal agencies to prevent the kind of systematic targeting that had nearly claimed Sarah's life. Her desk at Fort Belvoir was covered with case files from cities across America, each representing criminal organizations that had attempted to recruit or intimidate former service members. The Iron Circle's destruction had created a power vacuum that other groups were attempting to fill, requiring constant vigilance to prevent new networks from establishing themselves. "The Detroit model is spreading," she reported during a secure video conference with Agent Chen and other federal investigators. Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, they're all seeing copycat organizations trying to recruit veterans for criminal enterprises. Michael Shepard Brooks had found his calling in an unexpected place. The Veteran Counseling Center he'd established with Dr. Walsh's support had become a sanctuary for former service members struggling with the transition to civilian life. His gentle approach to trauma treatment, combined with his understanding of military culture, had created a therapeutic environment that traditional counseling programs had failed to achieve. The hardest part isn't the combat experience, he explained to a group of new counselors during a training session. It's coming home to a society that doesn't understand what you've been through and finding purpose when you're no longer part of something larger than yourself. His center had treated 47 veterans in 6 months, with a success rate that had attracted attention from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The protocols he'd developed were being studied for implementation at VA facilities nationwide. Ryan Hawk Anderson had matured rapidly during his 6 months of dealing with the aftermath of his first real combat experience. The young ranger, who'd once seen the world in simple terms, now understood the complex moral landscape that veterans navigated daily. His technical skills had evolved beyond military applications to include cybersecurity work that helped protect veteran organizations from digital infiltration by criminal groups. The Iron Circle's sophisticated use of social media and encrypted communications had taught him that modern threats required modern responses. "We're not just fighting gangs anymore," he explained during a briefing to other military cybersecurity specialists. "We're facing hybrid organizations that combine criminal enterprise with military tactics and digital warfare capabilities." Detective Anthony "Tony" Romano had paid the highest personal price for his role in exposing police corruption. His decision to testify against Commissioner Sullivan and other corrupt officers had made him a pariah within the Detroit Police Department, forcing him to accept a position with Agent Chen's federal task force. The Witness Protection Program had relocated his family to another city, where they lived under assumed names, while Romano worked to dismantle criminal networks in other jurisdictions. His insider knowledge of police corruption had proved invaluable in investigations across the Midwest. "The hardest part isn't the danger," he confided to Wolf during one of their periodic phone calls. "It's knowing that some of the people you worked with for 20 years were willing to protect criminals who targeted the veterans my son died serving alongside." Dr. Rebecca Walsh had transformed her emergency room into a model for identifying and protecting at-risk veterans. The protocols she'd developed for documenting suspicious injuries and connecting veteran patients with advocacy resources had been adopted by trauma centers in 12 states. Her research into the systematic targeting of veterans had become the foundation for federal policy changes that required law enforcement agencies to investigate crimes against former service members with the same priority given to hate crimes. As Wolf cleaned out his desk at Fort Benning, preparing for retirement after 2 decades of military service, he reflected on the consequences of the choices his team had made. They'd risked their careers to honor a debt to Sarah Mitchell and, in doing so, had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the safety of veterans nationwide. The bond forged between them during their unauthorized mission had evolved into something more permanent, a chosen family united by shared values and mutual respect. Their monthly reunions had become planning sessions for continued advocacy work, using their military skills to protect fellow veterans in ways the official system had failed to provide. 1 year after the attack that had changed everything, Sarah Mitchell walked across the stage at Wayne State University to receive her Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree. The auditorium erupted in applause as she accepted her diploma, but her eyes found the small group seated in the 3rd row. Wolf, Elena, Michael, Ryan, and Tony Romano, all of whom had taken time from their new careers to witness this moment of triumph. Dr. Rebecca Walsh stood at the side of the stage, her face showing the pride of a mentor who'd watched a trauma victim transform into an advocate. The woman who'd been beaten unconscious in a gas station parking lot had become a symbol of resilience and purpose, her recovery inspiring changes in how America treated its veterans. The VA hospital in Ann Arbor, where Sarah had accepted a position as a trauma nurse, bore little resemblance to the institutional bureaucracy that had failed so many veterans in the past. Her hiring had come with authorization to implement the treatment protocols she'd helped develop, creating an environment where former service members received care that acknowledged both their medical needs and their unique psychological challenges. "First day tomorrow," Wolf asked as the graduation ceremony concluded and the group gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Detroit River. "First day of the rest of my life," Sarah replied, her smile carrying none of the shadows that had haunted her during the months of recovery. "I've got 43 veteran patients scheduled for the first week, and each one represents a chance to get this right." Wolf's retirement from the Army had led to an unexpected second career with a veteran job placement program in Montana. His ability to connect with former service members struggling with civilian employment had made him invaluable to an organization dedicated to helping veterans find purpose after military service. "We've placed 87 veterans in meaningful employment over the past 6 months," he reported to the group. "Good jobs, not just minimum wage positions. Companies are starting to understand that military training translates into valuable civilian skills." His relationship with his teenage daughter, Emma, had finally begun to heal as retirement gave him time to be present for the important moments he'd missed during 20 years of military service. Their weekly fishing trips had become sacred time, allowing them to build the father-daughter bond that deployments had prevented. Elena's new role with military intelligence had evolved into something resembling a one-woman task force dedicated to preventing criminal infiltration of veteran communities. Her desk at Fort Belvoir had become the central coordination point for investigations spanning multiple states and federal agencies. "We've prevented 17 recruitment attempts by criminal organizations in the past 6 months," she reported, pulling up statistics on her tablet. "The Iron Circle model is dead, but new groups keep trying to fill the vacuum. We shut them down before they can establish themselves." All her work had gained recognition at the highest levels of the intelligence community, earning her a promotion to warrant officer and assignment to a classified program that monitored domestic security threats to military communities. Michael's Veteran Counseling Center had become a model for trauma treatment programs nationwide. The gentle giant, who'd questioned whether violence was ever the answer, had found his calling in healing the psychological wounds that combat left behind. "We're opening 3 new locations this year," he announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd found his true purpose. "Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland, all cities where the Iron Circle had operated. We're making sure that veterans have somewhere to turn when they're struggling with the transition." His partnership with Dr. Walsh had created treatment protocols that addressed both the immediate trauma of combat and the long-term challenges of adapting to civilian life. Their success rate had attracted funding from both government and private sources, allowing rapid expansion of services. Ryan's evolution from eager rookie to mature operator had accelerated during his assignment to a cybersecurity unit dedicated to protecting military networks from digital infiltration. His technical skills, combined with his first-hand experience of criminal tactics, had made him a valuable asset in the growing field of cyber warfare. "We've identified and neutralized 43 attempts to infiltrate military networks over the past year," he reported with the confidence of someone who'd found his specialty. "Criminal organizations are getting more sophisticated, but so are our countermeasures. His work had earned him selection for the Army's premier cybersecurity program, with orders to Fort Gordon for advanced training that would prepare him for eventual assignment to the military's most sensitive digital operations. Detective Romano's transition to federal law enforcement had been difficult, but ultimately rewarding. His family's relocation under witness protection had disrupted their lives, but his work with Agent Chen's task force had led to the dismantling of criminal networks in 6 cities. 12 major arrests this month, he reported, showing photographs of corrupt officials and criminal leaders who'd been taken into federal custody. The network the Iron Circle was part of reached further than we initially realized, but we're cutting them down piece by piece. His insider knowledge of police corruption had proved invaluable in reforming law enforcement agencies that had been compromised by criminal influence. The painful process of rebuilding trust between police departments and the communities they served was ongoing, but progress was measurable. Agent Chen had been promoted to head the federal task force on veteran-targeted crime, her successful dismantling of the Iron Circle network, establishing her as the Bureau's leading expert on criminal organizations that targeted former service members. We've documented attempts to establish Iron Circle-style operations in 23 cities, she reported during a secure video conference with the group. But the network we've built, military intelligence, federal law enforcement, medical professionals, and veteran advocates, has prevented any of them from gaining a foothold. Dr. Walsh's research into veteran trauma had led to her appointment as Director of Emergency Medicine at Detroit General, where she'd implemented protocols that had become the national standard for identifying and protecting at-risk veterans. As the evening wound down, the group gathered on the restaurant's riverfront terrace, looking out at the Detroit skyline, where lights reflected off the water like stars. The city that had nearly claimed Sarah's life had become the birthplace of a movement that protected veterans nationwide. 1 year ago, we were just soldiers trying to help a friend, Wolf observed, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen purpose emerge from tragedy. Now we're part of something bigger. Sarah smiled, her transformation from victim to advocate complete. We were always part of something bigger. We just needed to find our mission. The bonds forged in combat and strengthened through crisis had evolved into something permanent, a chosen family dedicated to protecting those who'd served their country. Their informal network had grown to include hundreds of advocates, investigators, medical professionals, and veterans who'd committed themselves to ensuring that America kept faith with those who'd answered the call to serve. The war for America's soul continued, but they'd won an important battle, and they'd proven that some principles were worth any sacrifice to defend. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.